Welcome back to my channel. My name is B and I am a PADI MSDT, aka a PADI Master Scuba Diver Trainer, and I am based in Roatan, Honduras. Today we're going to be talking about how you would conduct a dive briefing. Just a few prerequisites before we jump into what is actually needed in a dive briefing. For you as the instructor or dive master, it's really important that you're confident. If you aren't confident in your dive briefing and you're being quiet and sheltered like this, then your customers or your group isn't going to actually listen or want to follow you as a dive master. It's also important you have knowledge of the dive site, whether you've dived it before, or if you haven't dove it, then you've spoken to someone who has, and you've got all the relevant information from them. Next, make sure you use clear communication. That includes slow speaking, make sure you command the room, or if you're on a boat, the boat, and make sure you're loud enough so everyone can hear you. The final thing before we get going is be ready to anticipate questions. I prefer to say, if you have questions, please ask at the end, as to not interrupt my flow of speaking. So you are about to start your dive briefing. So it doesn't really matter where you do this. A lot of people choose to do it on land before the dive goes out on the boat, or a lot of people also decide to do it on the boat. As long as your dive briefing is good, you're going to be fine. The first thing you want to do is introduce yourself. I see this so often when people go straight into a dive briefing and their customers don't even know their name. Whether you've met them in the dive shop or not, there might be someone that's diving with them that hasn't met you yet. So it's really good to start off by just saying, "Hi, my name is B. I'm going to be your dive master today," and then you can go into the dive briefing. However, if you have someone that's helping you on the dive, for instance, a dive master in training, or an additional dive master anyway, please introduce them as well and let the customers know that if they need anything, they can go to them also. Now, before you start your dive briefing, you should already know the certification level of everyone in your dive group. However, if you don't, the beginning of the briefing is the perfect time to ask. This is going to ensure you're within standards for the depth. Additionally, you should also ask if everyone has a computer, and if they don't, then you can work out buddy systems based on that. For instance, if you have 4 people and 2 have open waters and 2 have advanced, and one of those in each group has a computer, you can buddy the 2 open waters up and the 2 advanced up. Alright, so now you have all the relevant information to be able to start your dive briefing. After you've introduced yourself and made sure everyone has a computer, now it's your time to actually start talking about the dive itself. So the first thing you're going to mention is where you are, what dive site it is. So for instance, if I was diving on Roatan, which I do every day, the first thing I would say is, "Hey, we are going to go to this section of the island today, and this is the dive site we're going to be diving." So I would say, "Hey, we're going to be going to West Bay today, and the dive site that we're going to be diving is Mandy's Eel Garden." Now, there are certain things in a dive briefing that you have to check off, and if you check them all off, then you've done a good job. However, if you want to do an excellent job, you want to get people excited about the dive, it's really nice to make the dive briefing almost like a story of the dive. So the first thing that I'm going to mention are the dive entry points. I'm going to explain that when we're getting off of the boat, we are going to do a giant stride entry off the back of the boat or a back roll on the side of the boat. Obviously, this differs for whatever boat you're on, but it's really important that your customers know how they're actually entering the water. You can let the customers know if you're going to be first in or if you're going to be last in the water. This is dependent on dive shop protocols, so it's really whatever you're working with. After you've explained the entry points and how everyone's getting into the water, you can then go on to say, once everyone is in the water, we will all signal, "Are we okay?" to go down. I will remind everyone to put their regulators in their mouths, and then we will deflate our BCD to descend. The next step in this is to talk about the actual dive site itself. So what are you descending onto? Are you descending onto a wreck? Are you descending onto a sandy bottom? Are you descending straight onto coral? Or are you descending in the blue? So, for instance, if I was doing Mandy's dive site, I would say, once we are descending, we are going to see a lovely sandy bottom, which is at about 25 feet. This lets the customers know the depth that they're going into and the kind of substrate that they are going down onto. Once you have elaborated that, you can then go on to explain the dive. After we descend onto the sand patch, there is a beautiful swim through that we are going to be going through. If anyone doesn't want to go through the swim through, feel free to follow our bubbles over the top. It is a very open swim through and it is a very short swim through as well. The swim through will actually take us down on a gradient to about 60 feet. And at that point, we will start swimming along the wall into the current. The reason that we're going to be swimming into the current is because we are actually going to be coming back to the boat. And so for the first half of the dive, we'll be swimming into the current so that on the way back, we can go with the current. Again, continue on with the dive briefing as if you're telling a story. At about halfway through the dive, or when one person reaches 1,500 or half a tank, is when we will start to come back to the boat. At this point, we will shallow up over the wall to about 30 feet and come back to the boat with the current. At the end of the dive, we will do a 3-minute safety stop at 15 feet. And then once everyone has completed that 3-minute safety stop, just let me know by either doing this signal or this signal, and we will start to ascend. So at this point, you've given the idea of the depth of the dive, the time of the dive, the substrate of the dive, and the safety procedure that's needed at the end of the dive. There are a few more other things that you would like to mention in a dive briefing. For instance, telling them when and how you're going to check their air. It would look a little something like this. I'm going to check your air every 20 minutes. I'm going to use this signal when I want that, and I want you to respond using thousands on the arms and hundreds in the air. Obviously, this is for if someone is using PSI, and this is a really good time to ask if someone is using bar. After you've told them how you're going to check your air, the next thing is to remind people what to do in an emergency situation if they get lost from a group. So for instance, the missing buddy procedure. Let them know that if they get separated from the group and they realise they can't see anyone, they need to wait there for 1 minute, not moving from their position, and once that 1 minute is done, they will ascend. Hopefully we will have done the same as a group and we will meet them at the surface. Another safety procedure that is vital, especially at the moment where we are because the seas are a little rough, is if it gets too rough or if there is an emergency above, the boat captain will come over our bubbles, he will rev the engine 3 times, and I will hear that and let everyone know that we are aborting the dive. At that point, I will shoot my SMB. We will not do a 3-minute safety stop because it is an emergency, and we will all ascend slowly. If that does happen, it's really important to stay next to me and to the SMB, as that is the only visual signal we will have at the surface, and the waves might be quite big. If the visibility is bad, and you can see this from the surface, it's really important to let your group know that they need to stay together or at least be able to see one person in front of them. Also, if you know you have a photographer, you know that you might have to go a little bit slower in terms of speed of the dive because they tend to stay at the same place and normally at the back of the group. Now that you've gone through most of the dive briefing, it's really important to recognise local regulations. So if there's any marine protected areas or no touch rules anywhere, please let your divers know that. For instance, in Roatan, we are in a marine protected area, so I would let them know, please do not touch, take or tease anything that we see on the dive. Obviously, this does not mean that you cannot pick up rubbish. If you see rubbish, please pick it up, put it in your BCD, and we'll get it out of the water and throw it away on land. Finally, this is meant to be a fun thing. People are paying for this dive. People are paying a lot of money for these dives, actually. So remind them of what you might see on the dive. This is a really nice time to get them excited for the dive just before they go into the water. So for instance, you might say for Mandy's Eel Garden, where there are eagle rays known to swim around that area, hey guys, so this is a really good spot for eagle rays, so keep your eye out in the blue, give them the signal at the same time, and also elaborate on other ones. Hopefully we're going to see some sea turtles, maybe we'll see some crabs, maybe some shrimp. It might be quite small, so I might tell you to look in there. Or maybe we might be lucky and see an eel. There's also a really sandy bottom, so we might be able to see some flounders or even some lettuce sea slugs or nudies. All of these things get the divers really excited for the dive, and also it's going to make your experience way better. At the end of your dive briefing, it's really important to ask your group if they have any questions. They also might be shy, they might not want to ask questions, so you can also say, hey guys, does anyone have any questions? And if they say, no, we're good, then you say, if you do and you don't want to say it right now, come up to me separately and I'll get that answered for you. This creates a safe environment for all the divers. Another thing to mention is that if you have a visual aid, it might help you. So if you have a sketched map or a whiteboard available where you can actually draw the dive site and the dive plan. That is going to keep them more engaged and actually watching you. A few final things is once you finish your dive briefing, you're going to say, all right, guys, let's get ready to hit the water. The pool is open. Make sure that everyone is getting their equipment checked, doing their buddy checks, and just all around in a okay, good, safe mood. And that's pretty much it. Of course, this is going to differ depending on where you are in the world and how intense you have to have your dive briefing because of safety regulations or because of safety in general. In Roatan, we have pretty easy diving, so the dive briefing doesn't have to be ridiculously extensive. We're not in cold water, we're not in dry suits, we're not doing really deep dives, so we don't have to do too much. Again, a dive briefing is meant to be brief. That's why it's called a briefing. So don't make it an hour long. It should be about 5 to 10 minutes. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next week for another vlog.